The grand entrance. Evelyn Moore took a steady breath as she stood outside the grand facade of Moore Towers, the luxury hotel chain she painstakingly built from scratch. She felt a sense of pride mixed with a hint of trepidation as she prepared for an unusual mission. Dressed in modest attire with her signature elegance stripped away, Evelyn looked nothing like the powerful, highly respected businesswoman who had spent the past decade building a hospitality empire. Her goal today was to experience her hotel as any other guest might, to see firsthand the level of service her staff provided without the influence of her status. It wasn't the first time Evelyn had gone undercover in one of her hotels, but it was the first time in Moore Towers, her flagship location. She had invested years into making this place a beacon of elegance and inclusivity. Yet in recent months, she'd heard whispers that the hotel's reputation was slipping. There were rumors that guests who didn't look the part were sometimes treated poorly. Evelyn refused to believe it, until she'd seen it with her own eyes. As she stepped into the expansive lobby, she immediately noticed the grandeur of her creation. Towering crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished to perfection, and luxurious floral arrangements in every corner. It was exactly how she'd envisioned it years ago, a place where anyone, from any background, could feel like royalty. But the warmth she'd hoped her guests felt was noticeably absent in the eyes of the staff members who watched her from across the room. Instead of welcoming smiles, she caught glances of disinterest and disdain. Evelyn approached the reception desk, where a young man named Trent was stationed, his name tag shining against his crisp white shirt. As she stepped closer, Trent barely looked up from his computer, his fingers tapping away with the kind of boredom that hinted he'd rather be anywhere else. She greeted him politely, requesting a room for the night, but Trent merely glanced at her over his screen, his eyes filled with thinly veiled irritation. "Are you sure you're at the right place?" he asked, his tone sharp and dismissive. He finally looked her over, his eyes lingering on her modest attire, the old scarf she wore, and her scuffed leather handbag, a favorite of hers, worn with age, but kept for sentimental reasons. Evelyn, keeping her voice steady, replied, "Yes, I'd like to stay here for the night." Trent chuckled softly, exchanging a smirk with a nearby staff member. "Well, this is a luxury hotel, you know. Rooms don't come cheap." His words carried a note of derision that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. She could feel the judgment radiating from him and the other staff member, and it was everything she had feared: unprofessional, unkind, and utterly beneath the values she had instilled in her employees. She took a calming breath, reminding herself why she was here. "I understand," she replied, her voice calm. "I'll take whatever room you have available." Trent sighed heavily, as if she were an inconvenience. "If you say so," he muttered, his fingers tapping slowly on his keyboard, clearly drawing out the process. He leaned over to another employee, whispering something that made them both chuckle. Evelyn caught a few words. "Doesn't look like she belongs," followed by more stifled laughter. Evelyn's heart raced with a mix of anger and disappointment, but she held herself together. She was here to observe, to understand. And it was painfully clear that these people had no idea who she was or what she stood for. After what felt like an eternity, Trent handed her a key card with a mocking flourish. "Enjoy your stay," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you can afford it." Evelyn took the key, her hand steady despite the rage simmering inside her. She glanced around the lobby, noticing that a small crowd of employees had gathered nearby, openly whispering and sneering. She'd spent years building this hotel on principles of respect, kindness, and inclusivity. Yet these people, her own staff, seemed to mock those very values. As she made her way toward the elevator, she caught fragments of their snide comments. "Who does she think she is?" One whispered loudly, and another replied, "Maybe she wandered in here by mistake." Evelyn felt the sting of their words, but she kept her head high. It reminded her of the years she'd spent fighting to prove herself, back when she was starting out in the industry. She'd faced this kind of contempt countless times before, and it had only made her stronger. Now, in the very place she created as a refuge for anyone who wanted a taste of luxury, she was once again facing judgment simply because of her appearance. When she reached her assigned room, she stepped inside and took a moment to process what she'd experienced. The room, though adequate, was far from the level of luxury she expected her guests to receive. It seemed Trent had given her one of the hotel's least impressive rooms, another silent reminder of how they perceived her. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, a flood of memories from her past washing over her. She had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, where people looked at her and assumed she wouldn't make it far. She had been underestimated her whole life, dismissed by those who thought they were better simply because they had more money, better clothes, or a higher social status. Yet, through sheer grit and determination, she had defied every stereotype, fought for every inch of success, and created a life that even her younger self could never have dreamed of. She remembered her mother, who had worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table, often going without so that Evelyn and her siblings could eat. Her mother had instilled in her a sense of resilience and self-worth, teaching her to always respect others regardless of their appearance or background. Evelyn had carried those lessons with her, making them the cornerstone of her business philosophy. But as she sat there, her mind returned to the present, to the betrayal she felt in her own hotel. She had entrusted these employees with upholding her vision, yet they were tearing it apart with their disdain and cruelty. It was a bitter realization, but Evelyn knew she couldn't ignore it. This wasn't just about a failed test of customer service. This was a wake-up call, a chance to confront the toxic culture that had taken root in her absence. As she sat alone in that modest room, Evelyn's resolve solidified. Tomorrow, she would return, not as a disguised guest, but as the powerful woman who owned this hotel and every other location bearing her name. These employees would soon learn the consequences of their actions, and they would see, perhaps for the first time, the true power of respect and integrity. Evelyn was determined to transform this experience into something meaningful, not only for herself, but for the entire hotel industry. This was her hotel, her legacy, and she was not about to let it be tarnished by those who couldn't see past the surface. The return with purpose. The morning sun rose, casting a soft glow over the city skyline. Evelyn's mind was sharp and focused as she prepared for the day ahead, her resolve only strengthening as she replayed the events of the previous day in her mind. The sting of humiliation was still fresh, and with it a renewed sense of purpose. Today, she would return to more towers, but not as the anonymous guest from yesterday. She would be back with a deliberate plan, determined to observe further and uncover the depths of the problem. Evelyn dressed in the same modest clothing as before, opting for simplicity to avoid raising any suspicions. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she wore no jewelry. She wanted to maintain the appearance of an ordinary guest, an outsider. As she walked through the busy streets toward her hotel, her heart pounded with anticipation. This time, however, it wasn't nerves that fueled her. It was a fierce commitment to bring about change. Entering the grand lobby again, Evelyn immediately felt the weight of the judgmental stares upon her. The same employees from yesterday were clustered near the reception desk, exchanging looks and hushed whispers as they noticed her approach. She held her head high, ignoring their smirks and side glances. She had faced far worse in her life, and she wasn't about to let a few unprofessional employees shake her resolve. Trent, the front desk receptionist from the day before, was once again stationed at his post. He caught sight of her approaching and rolled his eyes, an amused smirk crossing his face as he leaned toward a fellow employee, whispering something that made the other snicker. Evelyn's face remained unreadable as she stepped up to the counter, meeting Trent's gaze with unwavering calm. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice steady. "I'd like to extend my stay for one more night." Trent's smirk widened, his amusement barely concealed. "Oh, back again, are we?" he sneered, crossing his arms as if preparing for a game. "Didn't you have a good enough time yesterday?" "Actually, I did," she replied, her tone unflinching. but I'd still like to stay." The receptionist chuckled, exchanging a look with a nearby staff member. "Well, we're fully booked today," he said dismissively, barely concealing the sarcasm in his voice. "So unless you got a little extra cash hidden away somewhere, I'm afraid you'll need to find somewhere else to stay." Evelyn didn't let his words faze her. "I think you'll be able to find a room for me," she replied calmly, her eyes locked onto his. She could sense the growing crowd of employees behind her, drawn in by the spectacle of the out-of-place woman daring to request a room in their esteemed hotel. The quiet laughter, the shared glances, the blatant disregard for her, all of it confirmed her worst suspicions. Trent shook his head dramatically. "Look, I'd really love to help you, but we got a certain standard to uphold here," he said with exaggerated politeness. "This isn't exactly the kind of place where just anyone can book a room." He gestured around the luxurious lobby, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is that so?" Evelyn asked, arching an eyebrow. She was testing his patience, but more importantly, she was testing his attitude. The arrogance he displayed was more than just unprofessional. It was insulting. And judging by the smug faces of his colleagues, it seemed to be a common sentiment among the staff. "Yeah, that's right," Trent replied, his expression one of barely concealed amusement. "We cater to a specific kind of guest here, people who appreciate the finer things in life, people who belong here." The words hung in the air, each one a reminder of the attitude she'd spent her life defying. She could feel a storm brewing within her, but Evelyn remained composed. Her voice, however, held a note of warning as she replied, "I see. Well, I suppose I'll have to find a way to fit in. Then." "Good luck with that," Trent muttered, not even bothering to hide his disdain. Evelyn felt her patience slipping, but she took a steadying breath and handed him her card. "I can pay for another night," she said simply. With an exaggerated sigh, Trent swiped her card and handed it back to her. "Room 212, he said, a mocking smile on his face, "and don't expect any special treatment." She took the key card and turned, her expression unreadable. She knew that in her modest attire, she looked like someone they could dismiss, someone who didn't belong. They didn't know that she was the owner, the very woman responsible for their employment, for the luxury surrounding them. Evelyn made her way through the lobby, feeling the weight of the hostile stares following her. She could hear snippets of their hushed voices, cruel laughter, and biting remarks. Why's she even here? Someone whispered, barely concealing their sneer. Another laughed, adding, "Maybe she thinks she's a celebrity." As she reached her floor, Evelyn paused for a moment, allowing herself to absorb the weight of their scorn. Every look, every mocking word was a reminder of why she had worked so hard to build more towers in the first place. She wanted a hotel that welcomed everyone, regardless of their background, a place where anyone could experience elegance and respect. Yet here she was, facing the same prejudice she had fought so hard to overcome. The room Trent had assigned her was even less impressive than the one from the night before. It was cramped, dimly lit, and clearly hadn't been maintained to the standards she expected of her hotels. She sat on the bed, her mind racing with anger and frustration. She had built this place with her own hands, sacrificed countless hours to create a haven for people to experience the finest hospitality. But now it felt like everything she had fought for was being eroded by the very people she had entrusted to maintain her vision. Evelyn thought back to her early years, to the endless hours she'd worked to prove herself in an industry dominated by those who underestimated her. She remembered her first hotel, a modest establishment that she had managed to transform into a respected name through sheer hard work and unyielding commitment to her guests. She had once scrubbed floors, waited tables, and taken reservations herself, all to build her dream from the ground up. She had been the embodiment of resilience, determination, and respect for every guest who walked through her doors. Yet, despite all her success, despite having achieved what many had said was impossible, she found herself facing the same prejudice and dismissal. She had come so far, yet here she was, reduced once more to a stereotype by people who didn't know her, didn't care about her story. A sudden knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Trent standing there, holding a tray with a single glass of water, his smirk unmistakable. "Complimentary water for our guests," he sneered, holding the tray just out of her reach. Before she could react, he tipped the glass, splashing water across her face and chest, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "Oh, my apologies," he said, his tone mocking. "Didn't mean to get you all wet." Laughter erupted from the small group of staff members who had gathered behind him, some of them snapping photos or recording videos on their phones. Evelyn felt the humiliation sting her to her core, the cold water trickling down her skin like a bitter reminder of every rejection, every struggle she had faced. But she refused to let them see her break. She straightened, meeting Trent's gaze with a steely resolve that only made his smirk widen. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before coming to a place that's out of your league," he taunted, crossing his arms as he leaned in, his arrogance practically radiating off him. "This isn't a shelter. It's a luxury hotel, in case you forgot." Evelyn clenched her fists, her anger barely contained. Every insult, every mocking laugh chipped away at her composure, but she held firm. She knew who she was, what she had accomplished, and no amount of their scorn could erase that. Trent stepped back, gesturing to the security guards who had joined the crowd. "Escort this guest out," he ordered, his voice dripping with disdain. "We don't need her kind here." The guards grabbed her arms, roughly leading her down the hall and toward the lobby. She could feel the eyes of the staff on her, their laughter and whispered taunts filling the air. Each step felt like a blow to her dignity, but she refused to let them see her crumble. She held her head high, her pride intact even as they shoved her out of her own hotel's front doors. As she stumbled onto the sidewalk, drenched and humiliated, Evelyn took a deep breath, letting the anger and frustration settle within her. They had treated her like she was nothing, mocked her, dismissed her, and dragged her through the mud. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that she was the owner, the woman who had built this place from nothing. She stood there, catching her breath, feeling the weight of her experiences and the fire that had driven her for so many years. This humiliation would not break her. It would become the fuel for her next move, a decision that would shake the very foundations of more towers. Tomorrow, she would return, not as a stranger, but as the powerful woman who owned this empire, and justice would be served. The unveiling. The next day dawned bright and clear, a sharp contrast to the tempest brewing within Evelyn's heart. The sting of yesterday's humiliation remained vivid in her mind, but alongside it simmered a fierce determination. Today, she would not be the anonymous guest they'd mocked and dismissed. Today, she would return as Evelyn Moore, the owner and founder of Moore Towers, and she intended to dismantle the toxic culture that had taken root within her own walls. After making a few strategic calls to her trusted associates, Evelyn was ready. She'd set a plan in motion that would leave no room for excuses or denials. Every sneer, every whisper, every cruel joke she had endured yesterday would be repaid, not with anger, but with a ruthless resolve to uphold the values she had built her empire upon. This wasn't just about restoring her dignity, it was about preserving her legacy. Evelyn dressed in her usual, understated elegance, a simple yet perfectly tailored suit that commanded respect without flash. She arrived at the hotel mid-morning, this time in her private car, the polished black vehicle gleaming as it pulled up to the grand entrance. The driver stepped out, opened her door, and she emerged with an air of quiet authority. She paused, allowing herself a moment to take in the building she had poured her heart into. It was a reminder of the long nights, the sacrifices, the hard-won battles she had fought to bring her dreams to life. This time, as she stepped into the lobby, her entrance did not go unnoticed. The staff who had mocked her so openly yesterday now stared with a mix of confusion and awe, their smug expressions faltering as they took in her poised, formidable presence. Evelyn could see the flicker of recognition cross a few faces as they finally connected her to the woman whose portrait hung in the executive hallways, whose name adorned the very doors they passed through each day. Trent, the receptionist, was nowhere in sight, but a few familiar faces from yesterday's encounter stood nearby, watching her with wide eyes and hushed whispers. A young woman with a nervous smile approached Evelyn. She introduced herself as Sarah, one of the assistant managers, and offered a courteous greeting. "Good morning, Ms. Moore," Sarah said, her voice tinged with awe and nervousness. "We didn't realize you would be visiting today." "That's precisely the point, Sarah," Evelyn replied, her tone even but pointed. "It seems that when I'm not expected, my presence is unwelcome here." A flicker of alarm crossed Sarah's face. She cast a wary glance at the nearby employees, who quickly busied themselves with tasks, hoping to avoid Evelyn's gaze. Evelyn could feel the tension rising as whispers spread across the lobby. The realization that she was not just any guest, but the owner herself, was sinking in. "I need you to gather all department heads in the main conference room within the hour," Evelyn continued, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "There are some issues we need to address." Sarah nodded, her face pale. "Of course, Ms. Moore. I'll get everyone together right away." As Sarah hurried off, Evelyn turned her attention to the lobby, observing the employees who were now looking at her with a mix of fear and guilt. Gone were the smirks and sneers. In their place were anxious glances and fidgeting hands. She felt no satisfaction in their discomfort, only a deep sense of purpose. They had created a culture of contempt and exclusion in the very place she had designed to be inclusive and welcoming, and she intended to make them understand just how serious a betrayal it was. Evelyn's gaze settled on the familiar faces of those who had laughed at her the day before. One of them, a young woman named Jenna, who had openly sneered at her attire, was now avoiding eye contact, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged brochures on a table. Another, a bellhop named Mark, who had smirked and whispered to his colleagues as Evelyn had passed, now looked pale, his eyes darting nervously in her direction. When the appointed time arrived, Evelyn made her way to the conference room, where a small crowd of employees had gathered, most of them department heads and senior staff members. She could see the apprehension on their faces, the dawning awareness that today's meeting was about more than routine operations. Seated at the head of the table, Evelyn waited until the last employee had entered the room, closing the door behind them. The air was thick with tension, and every pair of eyes was fixed on her, waiting, wondering what was about to unfold. "Good morning, everyone," Evelyn began, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I understand that my visit today has come as a surprise to most of you, and I can assure you, this is not the kind of surprise you would hope for." She paused, letting her words sink in, watching as unease spread across the room. Trent, the receptionist who had humiliated her so brazenly, sat near the end of the table, fidgeting uncomfortably. His usual arrogance was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he looked cornered, his face pale. "As many of you know, I founded Moore Towers with a specific vision," Evelyn continued. "A vision of elegance, yes, but also a vision of inclusivity and respect. I wanted to create a place where every guest, regardless of their background, felt valued. My goal was not just to build a hotel, but a community of people who shared these values, and I believed that I had succeeded." She looked around the table, her gaze piercing each of them in turn. "But yesterday I saw a different side of this hotel. I saw employees mocking and humiliating a guest, treating them with disdain simply because they didn't look like they belonged. I saw people sneering, whispering, even laughing. And the guest they treated this way was me." A shocked silence filled the room as her words hit their mark. Faces went pale, eyes widened, and mouths fell open. Evelyn could see the realization dawning in Trent's eyes, the horror as he finally understood who he had dismissed and humiliated. He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "Yes, I was that guest," Evelyn confirmed, her voice steady. I came here in unassuming clothes to see how my staff treated guests who didn't fit the stereotypical mold of luxury. And what I experienced was nothing short of appalling. The attitudes, the prejudice, the outright disrespect I witnessed were not only disappointing, but a betrayal of everything I have worked to build. Trent cleared his throat, his voice trembling as he stammered. Ms. Moore, I didn't know. I thought you were just. Evelyn raised a hand, silencing him. Exactly. You didn't know. And that is the problem. You didn't know because you didn't care to look beyond appearances. You didn't care to consider that every guest, regardless of how they look, deserves the same respect. Instead, you and your colleagues created an environment where judgment and arrogance overshadow the values of respect and dignity. She turned to the other department heads, her gaze sharp. I expect each of you to uphold these principles, and to make sure that every member of your team does the same. But clearly, somewhere along the way, that message was lost, and I intend to find out exactly where things went wrong. Sarah, the assistant manager, raised her hand, her voice shaky as she spoke. Ms. Moore, I'm so sorry. This isn't who we are. It's not who we're supposed to be. I had no idea this was happening. Evelyn's gaze softened slightly as she regarded Sarah, noting the genuine remorse in her expression. Perhaps you didn't know, Sarah, Evelyn replied, but it is your responsibility to know. As managers, as leaders, you set the standard for the rest of the staff. If there is arrogance, cruelty, or prejudice within these walls, it is because somewhere along the line, it was allowed to take root. She turned her attention back to Trent. You, however, were more than willing to display this behavior openly. You took pride in your disrespect, your condescension, and because of that, you have lost your place here. Effective immediately, you are no longer employed at Moore Towers. Trent's face turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. Ms. Moore, please. I didn't. I thought. You thought wrong, Evelyn replied firmly. This hotel deserves better. Its guests deserve better. I will not allow people who treat others with contempt to represent my brand. Turning back to the rest of the staff, Evelyn continued, for the rest of you, consider this a warning. This behavior will not be tolerated. I expect each of you to reflect on what Moore Towers stands for, and to remember that every guest who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. She stood, a formidable figure, her presence filling the room. I will be conducting further assessments, and any other incidents of disrespect will be met with similar consequences. I built this hotel to be a haven for people of all walks of life, and I intend to keep it that way. As she left the conference room, Evelyn could feel the weight of their stares, the shock and shame etched into their faces. She knew it would take time to rebuild the culture within her hotel, to remind her staff of the values she had instilled. But she was ready. She had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let her vision be tarnished by those who couldn't see beyond the surface. And as she walked through the lobby, her head held high, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Moore Towers would be a place of respect and warmth once again, and she would ensure that those who worked for her would honor that vision, now and always. A new beginning. The days following Evelyn's confrontation with her staff brought a sense of quiet but determined upheaval within Moore Towers. The hotel, once a place where unspoken prejudices had festered unchecked, now seemed to hold its breath, aware of the changes coming under Evelyn's resolute watch. Evelyn wasted no time in implementing sweeping reforms, each aimed at uprooting the toxic culture that had grown in her absence. One of her first actions was to call a meeting with her senior leadership team. The group included department heads, managers, and assistant managers who had witnessed Evelyn's address to the staff that day in the conference room. They gathered in the executive suite, a space Evelyn had meticulously designed to reflect her vision of elegance and openness. Now, as she looked at the faces of the people she had once trusted to carry out her mission, she could see traces of guilt, unease, and in some, even a hint of gratitude for the wake-up call she'd delivered. "Thank you all for joining me," Evelyn began, her tone steady and authoritative. "What happened over the past few days has revealed serious flaws in the way we operate. It has shown me that some of you have lost sight of what More Towers stands for. But we are here to change that. This will be a time of reckoning, yes, but also of transformation." The team listened, some leaning forward with anticipation, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Evelyn let her gaze linger on each of them before continuing. "Each of you is here because I believed you could lead, inspire, and carry out my vision for this hotel. But I've come to realize that my expectations may have been too high for some and not high enough for others. So let me make one thing clear. From this moment on, More Towers will operate with zero tolerance for discrimination, prejudice, and disrespect." She paused, watching as her words sank in. "I understand that change is difficult, but we have a responsibility, not just to our guests, but to one another. If we can't uphold basic decency and kindness, then we have no business calling ourselves a luxury hotel." Evelyn gestured to a folder on the table, filled with new policies and guidelines. "In this folder, you'll find the framework for our updated training program. Every employee, from entry level to executive, will undergo this program within the next 3 months. I want each of you to review these documents, and I expect you to set the example for everyone under your supervision. This training won't be just about customer service. It will focus on empathy, cultural sensitivity, and understanding our guests as people, not stereotypes." A hand raised tentatively in the back, and Evelyn nodded, recognizing Sarah, the assistant manager who had approached her with regret the previous day. "Ms. Moore, I want to thank you for addressing this issue so directly," Sarah began, her voice tinged with both guilt and determination. "I've worked here for years, and somewhere along the line, I think we lost the heart of what this place was supposed to represent. It's as if we became more concerned with looking elite than with treating our guests like human beings." Evelyn nodded, appreciating the honesty. "Sarah, I believe you speak for many of us. And you're right. Somewhere, we got lost. But we are all responsible for finding our way back. I want More Towers to be a place where every guest, whether they're in an evening gown or jeans, feels respected and valued. That has always been my vision, and I won't allow it to be overshadowed by the kind of arrogance I saw last week." A few members of the team murmured their agreement, nodding as Evelyn's words took hold. She could see the shift in their expressions. Some looked determined, others remorseful, but all seemed to recognize the weight of the moment. Once the meeting concluded, Evelyn spent the remainder of the day moving through the hotel, personally engaging with staff from every department. She visited the kitchens, where the head chef, Marco, greeted her with a handshake and a smile. Marco had always been a dependable leader, known for treating his team with respect and fostering a collaborative atmosphere in his kitchen. "Marco, I wanted to thank you for the environment you've created here," Evelyn said, her smile genuine. "I know your team respects you, and it shows in the quality of their work. I'd like you to assist with the new training program. You've built a culture of respect here that I'd like to see mirrored throughout the hotel." The chef's face broke into a pleased grin. "It would be an honor, Ms. Moore. And let me assure you, I'll do everything I can to support the changes you're implementing." From the kitchen, Evelyn continued her tour, visiting the housekeeping staff, who greeted her with both surprise and admiration. These were the individuals who had supported More Towers from the beginning, often working behind the scenes, unseen and unacknowledged. Evelyn made it a point to engage each of them, offering words of gratitude and listening to their feedback. Many expressed relief that the hotel was moving toward a more inclusive atmosphere, noting that they, too, had often felt the sting of judgment from certain employees who seemed to look down on others based on superficial differences. As Evelyn worked her way through each department, she could feel the tides beginning to turn. The culture of More Towers, once stagnant and tarnished by elitism, was slowly transforming. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but the change was real, and it was starting to take hold. However, there remained a particular group of employees who required her attention. The front desk staff, the face of the hotel, had been the source of much of the behavior Evelyn had witnessed during her undercover visit. After dismissing Trent, the receptionist responsible for the worst of the insults, Evelyn had appointed Sarah to oversee the desk and revamp its operations. Today, Evelyn planned to meet with the entire front desk team in private, to lay out her expectations, and if needed, to remove anyone unwilling to meet them. As she entered the small conference room where they had gathered, the front desk staff shifted nervously in their seats, their gazes fixed on the table, avoiding her penetrating stare. Sarah stood beside Evelyn, her expression stern yet supportive. She had been working tirelessly to address the team's issues, and Evelyn trusted her commitment. "Thank you all for coming," Evelyn began, her tone steady but unyielding. "I'm sure you're all aware of why we're here today. I won't rehash the details, but I will remind you of this. The front desk is the heart of this hotel. You are the first faces our guests see, the first voices they hear. You set the tone for their experience here. And if that tone is one of disdain or exclusion, you have failed not only me but yourselves and every guest who walks through those doors." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. Moore Towers was founded on respect and inclusivity. I chose those values because I believe they are the foundation of true luxury. Luxury is not about exclusivity. It's about treating every person with dignity. It's about providing warmth and hospitality to all, not just those who meet some arbitrary standard of appearance. A young man named Ben, who had only recently joined the team, raised his hand tentatively. "Ms. Moore, I want to apologize," he began, his voice sincere. "I realize now that I got caught up in the wrong mindset. I didn't understand the importance of the values you're talking about, but I want to learn. I want to do better." Evelyn offered him a small nod. "Ben, thank you. Recognizing where we've gone wrong is the first step to change. I appreciate your honesty, and I expect you to show your commitment not just in words, but in your actions from now on." Several other employees nodded, expressions of relief and determination on their faces. Evelyn could see that her message was beginning to resonate, even with those who had previously shown indifference. For the next hour, she outlined her vision in detail, emphasizing that every interaction, no matter how small, contributed to the guest's experience. She spoke about empathy, about the power of kindness, and about the responsibility they each held to make every guest feel valued. By the end of the meeting, Evelyn felt a shift in the room. She could see it in the way they looked at her, the way they held themselves, a new sense of pride and responsibility beginning to replace their previous arrogance. As she left the room, Evelyn felt a profound sense of hope. Change was in the air, and it was spreading. The staff had begun to understand that Moore Towers was more than just a luxury hotel. It was a reflection of her life's work, her values, her vision. And they, as its caretakers, bore the responsibility to uphold that vision. The following week, Evelyn implemented an open-door policy, encouraging staff from all levels to share their experiences, concerns, and ideas with her directly. Employees who had felt invisible before now had a voice, and they were quick to embrace this opportunity. From bellhops to housekeepers, they shared stories of guest interactions, both good and bad, helping Evelyn identify further areas for improvement. She listened, took notes, and applied what she learned, reinforcing her commitment to the culture of respect and inclusion she was rebuilding. Guests, too, began to notice the difference. Evelyn received letters of appreciation from individuals who felt a renewed sense of welcome and warmth at Moore Towers. The hotel, once shadowed by quiet judgments and hidden prejudices, was regaining its reputation as a place of genuine luxury, where the beauty of the surroundings was matched by the kindness of its staff. One afternoon, as Evelyn observed the bustling lobby, she saw a moment that filled her with pride. Sarah, who had been promoted to front desk manager, was speaking warmly to an elderly couple, helping them find a quiet spot in the lounge. Nearby, A young family with children in tow was greeted with smiles from the concierge, who handed them coloring books to keep the little ones entertained. The air was filled not with whispered judgments but with laughter, warmth, and respect. Evelyn knew there would still be challenges ahead, but as she watched her staff embody the values she held dear, she felt that she had, at last, set More Towers back on the right path. It was no longer simply a hotel. It was a testament to her journey, her resilience, and the legacy of kindness she had always aspired to leave behind. A legacy of transformation. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's relentless pursuit of change at More Towers began to yield visible results. The staff training sessions, now a mandatory part of employment, took place in every corner of the hotel. Sessions were held in the conference rooms, the kitchen, the housekeeping department, and even in the lobby after hours. Evelyn wanted every employee, from the highest-ranking managers to the part-time custodial staff, to understand and embody the hotel's values. These sessions, overseen by Evelyn herself, were far from typical corporate training. Evelyn had designed them to include immersive role-playing exercises, discussions on empathy and cultural sensitivity, and personal reflection activities that required each staff member to confront their own assumptions and biases. To ensure the training resonated, she invited guest speakers who shared stories about experiences of discrimination and exclusion, adding a deeply personal layer to the lessons. Some sessions brought tears, others brought uncomfortable realizations, but every session ended with a renewed sense of purpose. Employees began to see the hotel's mission in a new light, one that extended beyond their roles to impact the lives of the guests they served. One particular session became a turning point for everyone involved. Evelyn had arranged for Sarah, the assistant manager who had overseen the front desk, to share her own experiences. Sarah, who had grown up in a modest household and worked her way through college, spoke of the struggles she faced as a young professional. She recounted times when she, too, had been dismissed or underestimated because of her appearance or background. Her honesty resonated deeply with the staff, especially those who had felt invisible in their positions. By the end of her story, many employees were visibly moved, and some even offered apologies for their previous behaviors. After Sarah finished, Evelyn stood up, addressing the group with a soft but powerful conviction in her voice. Sarah's story is a reminder that every person who walks through our doors has a history, a story, a journey. Our job is not to judge that journey or to decide who is worthy of luxury. Our job is to treat each person with the same respect and warmth that we would wish for ourselves. She paused, looking around the room at the attentive faces. The world is full of places where people are judged based on their appearance, their wealth, their background. But More Towers will not be one of those places. Here, every guest is equal, and every guest deserves to feel valued. We are not just a hotel. We are a symbol of what true hospitality means. Following that pivotal session, something shifted in the hotel's atmosphere. Employees began interacting with each other in new ways. The hierarchies between departments softened, replaced by a sense of unity and mutual respect. Housekeepers and receptionists shared friendly greetings in the hallways. Kitchen staff and concierge employees exchanged stories over breaks, and the entire staff felt more like a family than a disparate group of individuals. Evelyn's open-door policy also became a bridge between staff and management, allowing employees to voice their ideas for improving the hotel's culture. One afternoon, Evelyn received an unexpected visit from Marco, the head chef. Marco, who was known for his creativity and perfectionism in the kitchen, had been one of Evelyn's most trusted employees for years. He approached her with a proposal that left her both surprised and intrigued. "Ms. Moore," he began, his voice carrying a rare note of excitement, "I've been thinking about ways we can make More Towers not only more inclusive but more of a cultural experience. I want to create a rotating menu that highlights dishes from around the world, recipes that reflect the diverse backgrounds of our guests. It would be a way to show them that their cultures are celebrated here, not just accommodated." Evelyn's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Marco, that's brilliant," she replied. A global dining experience would be a perfect way to bring our values to the forefront. Not only would it enrich our guests' experience, but it would also allow us to connect with them on a deeper level. With her approval, Marco set to work, collaborating with chefs and culinary specialists from various cultural backgrounds. The result was a new menu that featured flavors from every continent, with dishes that ranged from traditional French patisserie to vibrant Ethiopian injera platters. Each dish was accompanied by a description of its cultural significance, inviting guests to learn more about the world through their dining experience. The revamped menu quickly became one of the hotel's defining features. Guests, delighted by the diverse culinary offerings, frequently left glowing reviews, praising Moore Towers not only for its luxury, but for its genuine embrace of inclusivity. Evelyn was proud to see her hotel becoming a place that celebrated all backgrounds, a place that was truly living up to her vision. But Evelyn wasn't finished. As part of her commitment to rebuilding the hotel's culture, she introduced a series of community engagement initiatives. She arranged for the hotel to host monthly events open to the public, such as art exhibits, cultural performances, and guest lectures. She also collaborated with local charities, organizing volunteer opportunities for her staff to participate in together. The initiatives had a twofold purpose. They not only reinforced the hotel's commitment to inclusivity, but also fostered bonds among the employees, creating a shared sense of purpose that extended beyond their day-to-day duties. One of the most memorable events was an art exhibit featuring work from underrepresented artists in the community. The exhibit was held in the hotel's ballroom, where the artwork, paintings, sculptures, and photography filled the space with vibrant colors and stories of resilience. The exhibit drew in a diverse crowd, from local art enthusiasts to guests visiting from other cities. Evelyn herself mingled with the attendees, engaging in conversations about the pieces on display and the stories behind them. She noticed the pride in her staff's eyes as they welcomed guests to the exhibit, explaining the significance of each piece and offering personal reflections. During the event, Evelyn was approached by a guest, an elderly woman named Mrs. Yamada, who had been staying at Moore Towers for a week. Mrs. Yamada had noticed the transformation in the hotel's atmosphere since her arrival, and she wanted to express her gratitude. "Ms. Moore," Mrs. Yamada began, her voice filled with emotion. "I've been a guest at this hotel many times over the years, but this is the first time I've truly felt welcomed, like I belong here. I've always loved the elegance of Moore Towers, but now I feel its warmth, too. It's a place where people like me are seen and respected. Thank you for that." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to Mrs. Yamada's words. This, she realized, was why she had fought so hard. This was the impact she had always dreamed of making. She took Mrs. Yamada's hands in hers, her voice soft with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Yamada. Your words mean more to me than you can imagine. Moore Towers is as much yours as it is mine, and I am honored to have guests like you here." As the evening drew to a close, Evelyn looked around at the bustling crowd, the lively energy filling every corner of the hotel. The transformation she had envisioned was now unfolding before her eyes. Moore Towers had become a sanctuary of inclusion, a place where people of all walks of life could experience not just luxury, but genuine hospitality and human connection. Yet Evelyn's journey was not complete. She knew that the true test of her efforts would be in the hotel's ability to sustain this culture, to ensure that respect and kindness remained its cornerstones long after her direct involvement faded. With this in mind, she created a Culture of Hospitality Committee, composed of staff members from all departments, to continue overseeing the hotel's values and commitments. The committee would meet monthly to discuss any concerns, suggestions, or feedback from employees and guests alike, ensuring that Moore Towers' principles remained a priority. Finally, Evelyn implemented a guest feedback initiative, encouraging patrons to share their experiences, not just with service, but with the atmosphere and inclusivity of the hotel. She read every comment that came in, often moved by the stories guests shared. Many remarked on the unexpected kindness they had encountered, the sense of belonging they had felt in the hotel's halls. For Evelyn, these messages were the ultimate validation of her efforts. One day, as she was reviewing the feedback, Evelyn came across a note from a single mother who had recently stayed at the hotel with her young daughter. The mother wrote about how, despite feeling out of place in such a luxurious setting, she had been treated with warmth and respect by the staff. She recounted how her daughter had received a special activity kit upon arrival, filled with crayons, puzzles, and a storybook that celebrated diversity. The small gesture had made them feel not only welcome but valued. The message ended with a line that touched Evelyn's heart. "For the first time, I felt that a place like this was for us too. Thank you for making us feel like we belong." As Evelyn finished reading, a quiet sense of fulfillment settled over her. She had set out to build more than a hotel. She had built a community, a place that recognized the dignity of every person. She had built something lasting, a legacy that would continue long after her own hands were no longer shaping it. Looking out over the hotel's grand lobby, Evelyn felt a sense of peace. Moore Towers was more than she had ever dreamed it could be, a place of genuine luxury and heart. And as she stood there, surrounded by the beauty she had crafted, Evelyn knew she had succeeded in creating not just a hotel, but a home for anyone who entered its doors. The ripple effect. Months passed, and Moore Towers continued to thrive under Evelyn's renewed vision. The transformation was evident in every aspect of the hotel, from the attentive way staff interacted with guests to the warmth that radiated from each corner of the lobby, restaurant, and suites. The change had brought with it a reputation that extended beyond the hotel walls. Moore Towers was now celebrated not only for its luxury, but as a symbol of inclusion and hospitality. Guests from all walks of life came to experience what had become known as the Moore Standard, a level of service defined by empathy, respect, and dignity. Yet, the true impact of Evelyn's work was only beginning. Moore Towers became a case study for hospitality schools, a shining example in industry conferences, and even attracted media attention for the culture Evelyn had cultivated. She was invited to speak at numerous events, where she shared the story of her transformation of Moore Towers, her undercover experience, and the lessons she had learned about leadership and humility. In her speeches, she highlighted the power of empathy in an industry often focused on appearance, profit, and exclusivity. Her words resonated widely, igniting conversations among business leaders about the true essence of luxury. But the biggest surprise came when Evelyn received a letter from the Hospitality Alliance, a prominent organization in the industry. They had taken notice of Moore Towers' transformation and invited her to participate in an initiative they were launching, a program to promote inclusivity in hospitality worldwide. They wanted Evelyn to help create a blueprint for other hotels, one that would guide establishments on how to foster a culture of genuine hospitality and respect. Evelyn was both honored and humbled by the invitation. She knew that her experiences and the changes she had made at Moore Towers could serve as a foundation for others. Accepting their proposal, she spent the next several weeks collaborating with experts, sharing her journey, and helping develop resources for hotels to implement empathy training, inclusive practices, and robust anti-discrimination policies. Evelyn's vision soon took on a life of its own. Moore Towers became the flagship model for the Hospitality Alliance's initiative, which they fittingly named the Moore Model. As part of the program, Evelyn and her team created a comprehensive toolkit for hotels that wanted to follow the Moore Standard. The toolkit included training materials, empathy exercises, role-playing scenarios, and even a mentorship program that connected hotels across the world to share best practices and success stories. The launch of the program attracted national attention. Articles and interviews with Evelyn appeared in prestigious magazines and newspapers, each of them sharing her journey from humble beginnings to a powerful leader transforming the industry. As Moore Towers continued to flourish, other hotels began adopting the Moore model, inspired by Evelyn's commitment to inclusivity and kindness. The once small ripple she had created within her own hotel was now becoming a wave of change throughout the industry. Back at Moore Towers, Evelyn continued her hands-on approach, ensuring that her hotel remained the shining example of her values. One day, as she walked through the lobby, she noticed a familiar face, a young woman who had been one of the most reluctant employees during the early days of her reforms. Jenna, the receptionist who had once sneered at Evelyn's modest attire, now worked with a quiet confidence that spoke to the growth she had experienced. Evelyn approached her, and Jenna looked up with a smile, no longer the dismissive smirk of the past, but a genuine warmth that Evelyn was pleased to see. "Jenna," Evelyn greeted her, "I've noticed the way you've been interacting with guests. You've come a long way." Jenna's face lit up with pride. "Thank you, Ms. Moore. I'll be honest, I didn't understand it at first, but over these past months, I've learned so much. You taught us that every person deserves to be treated with respect, and that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. This place isn't just my job anymore, it's my purpose." Evelyn felt a swell of pride, not just for Jenna, but for the journey they had all been on together. She placed a gentle hand on Jenna's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. You embody the Moore standard, and you're proof that people can change when they're given the opportunity and the right guidance." Jenna nodded, her eyes shining. "I owe that to you, Ms. Moore. Thank you for believing in me." Evelyn smiled, realizing that this, more than any award or recognition, was her greatest achievement, the ability to influence lives, to inspire change that would ripple out far beyond her own reach. The hotel continued to host community events and public lectures, and it wasn't long before Moore Towers became more than just a destination. It became a cultural hub. Guests began booking their stays specifically to attend these events, drawn by the chance to experience a place where luxury and inclusivity coexisted in harmony. Evelyn's efforts had created not just a new kind of hotel, but a movement, one that attracted people from around the world who believed in her vision. Evelyn also noticed that her employees had taken on the role of ambassadors for the Moore standard, teaching new hires the values and principles she had instilled. Whenever new staff joined the team, they were immediately immersed in the hotel's unique culture, guided by senior employees who had witnessed the transformation firsthand. The Moore standard was no longer just a set of rules. It had become a way of life, a shared belief system that bonded the team together. One evening, as Evelyn was preparing to leave for the night, she received an unexpected visitor in her office. It was Mrs. Yamada, the elderly guest who had attended the art exhibit months ago. She carried a small gift wrapped in delicate paper, her eyes bright with excitement. "Ms. Moore, I wanted to bring you something as a token of my appreciation," Mrs. Yamada said, offering her the package. Evelyn took it gently, unwrapping it to find a beautifully crafted Japanese tea set. "This tea set belonged to my grandmother," Mrs. Yamada explained, her voice filled with emotion. "It has been in my family for generations. I want you to have it, as a reminder of the kindness you've shown me and countless others. You've built something here that goes beyond luxury. You've built a home, a sanctuary." Evelyn was deeply moved. "Mrs. Yamada, I don't know what to say. This is an incredible gift, and I'm honored to receive it." Mrs. Yamada smiled. "Then you understand, Ms. Moore, what you've given us. You've shown me that respect, warmth, and generosity are the greatest luxuries of all. Thank you for creating a place where those values come first." The two women shared a quiet moment, the tea set glinting under the soft light of Evelyn's office. After Mrs. Yamada left, Evelyn sat with the tea set before her, reflecting on the journey she had taken to reach this point. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every hard lesson had led her to this moment. She had transformed her hotel into a place that not only embraced luxury, but embodied humanity, a place where people like Mrs. Yamada felt cherished. As Evelyn sipped a cup of tea from the new set later that evening, she thought about the future of Moore Towers and the legacy she was leaving behind. She knew that the work was far from over. The hospitality industry still had a long way to go. But she also knew that Moore Towers had set a new standard, a guiding light that would inspire others to follow. Evelyn continued to mentor other hotel owners, helping them adopt the Moore standard in their own establishments. She shared her insights and her experiences, encouraging them to prioritize empathy and inclusivity. Through her work, she saw the ripple effect expand, touching lives and changing mindsets in places she had never even visited. In the years that followed, Moore Towers became an icon, a symbol of what the hotel industry could be. People traveled from across the world, not just to experience the luxury, but to feel the warmth and respect that defined the Moore standard. Former staff members who had grown under Evelyn's leadership went on to manage their own hotels, carrying her teachings with them and spreading the Moore standard wherever they went. Each of them knew that Evelyn had given them more than just a job. She had given them a purpose, a belief in the transformative power of kindness. Evelyn herself took on a new role within the Hospitality Alliance, where she advocated for widespread change across the industry. She became a vocal leader, pushing for policies that protected both guests and employees from discrimination and bias. Her efforts led to significant reforms, and her work became a model for industries beyond hospitality. In her twilight years, Evelyn often visited Moore Towers as a guest, finding joy in watching the staff uphold the standards she had set. She no longer needed to oversee the operations personally. Her legacy was carried on by the people she had mentored, the guests who shared their stories, and the employees who treated each interaction as a moment to practice respect and empathy. One evening, as she sat in the hotel's lounge, watching the familiar bustle of guests and staff, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had created more than a hotel. She had created a lasting legacy, a ripple of kindness that would continue to touch lives for generations. Evelyn Moore had transformed the industry, and in doing so, had left the world a little brighter, a little kinder, and a little more welcoming.